Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I am Nick Scheist, and you may remember me from the Scheist Podcast and Bad Movies We Love.
And I'm Seth Vargas of the Movie Friends Podcast.
And we decided to join forces, a team-up, if you will, because X-Men 97 was so good, we just couldn't help ourselves.
That's right. So join us as we discuss our personal history with the comics, the films, and the collectible trading cards of the X-Men universe.
And, of course, the catalyst for it all, X-Men 97. To me, my ex-friends. Yeah, there's some like big jumps, especially between the ends of the episode. It's like we don't start episode 5 back in the desert with Storm and Forge. It's like, no, we're jumping right into this. And then episode 6, it's like you think you would leave us in the wake of this big event that just happened. Like, psych, we're in space.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun that way because you really get to sort of experience how broad the X-Men is. And again, like if you're looking at the show like, hey, we don't know that we're getting renewed for a season 2, so we want to make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps to encompass as much as we can. I think that's why a character like Morph is really great for this show. Like I talked about in season 1, like he really gets to explore like, hey, I want to be Psylocke, or I want to be Silver Samurai, or I can be any other character I need to be to help give those Easter eggs away and have like good reason for it. So, you know, the intro for this show, which I watch every time, I was very focused on this time in that we see the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, where I don't think we ever have seen Juggernaut on this show. Or I think it's Richter, who is the one in like the white and gray. We haven't seen Mystique as far as I know. We haven't seen Sabretooth as far as I know. We haven't seen Pyro as far as I know. So the whole intro on that Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, we only see Emma Frost, White Queen, in this episode 5. And I'm curious, like, why all these characters, other than it's the intro from the original show. But, you know, there are a lot of bad mutants that we've seen, like could be Mojo and Sinister and these other characters, but it is the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants that doesn't exist on the show. So it's kind of an interesting look at who's going to maybe be in the future episodes of this show, like whether or not that is going to become a thing again. Obviously, this is the old terrorist Magneto and his terrorist cronies. So we're trying to distance ourselves from that. But that's a good segue for episode 5, because it is about this former terrorist who is now being asked to lead Genosha as a UN nation, which is crazy to think how fast that happened, because in real life, that would have been a very, very drawn out process, even with Magneto pulling everybody into space and threatening. Right. I think.
Well, if you or I were writing this season, you'd have the Lawn story, which would maybe be leading to Genosha and all of those things, and maybe little things here and there. But each episode of this show so far is kind of its own thing, big ideas. And by the end of this, we still aren't really into the main story of what this season ends up being. It's crazy. And I as I say that, it maybe sounds like I'm saying that as a bad thing, but I'm not. Like, I think all these episodes are great, like on their own. And like you said, it really shows the breadth of the X-Men universe. And it's just like, all right, let's touch on this. Let's touch on this. Let's touch on this. And none of it's throwaway stuff. All of it's going to look cool. All of it's going to have cool lines. Here's a demon bird. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, I hope you're ready, because we're hitting the ground running. And this episode 5, I mean, this was the one that I mistook for episode 4, but this is the gut punch episode, in that this could have ended the first season. And oh my goodness, that would have just like sucked all of the air out of the show in a way that would have been awesome, because you have this like awesome show, you know, all this action, all this fun, all this great X-Men stuff. And then to leave it in this like just a vacuum of emotional devastation would have been a good place to end season 1. I understand why they didn't. And I kind of appreciate that they didn't either, because we get some more climbing action after that, where it's not like, hey, you just have to be gutted at the end of season 1. Because when I watched it the first time, it was like kind of late at night. I wasn't expecting the show to have done something like this in episode 5 or at all. And so I was just like kind of quiet. And, you know, at the end of each episode, they play music and they show the character title cards and like, oh, Cyclops shoots lasers out of his asshole.
Right.
You know, we get that, but the music is way toned down and it's just very morose. And, we're in this state of mourning as we should be. And that's like a really interesting place to be for an X-Men property, especially covering all the themes that we've covered to this point. And I think what I really liked about this episode, watching it a second time, was how much emotional investment we get before devastation comes.
Yep.
We were introduced to Genosha for realistically the first time on the ground, and it's like the Wakanda of the mutant nation, right? Like technology is great, the streets are clean, everyone's having fun, mutants living free and doing what they want, working in collaboration with one another. It's a utopia for mutants, and so to see that portrayed in a way that like is like, wow, this is really cool. I want to see more of what it looks like to exist in a world of just like mutants using their powers for good. That's a very interesting place to be, and that's kind of the hinge that the new comic series decided to use when they did the mutant nation of Krakoa, and what would really happen if mutants all work together for the common good. And I think this is a great example of showing it to us. I love that Gambit points out how expensive a single apple is, because when I go to the market and I see my apple's $2, I'm like, we're not that far off. I feel Gambit. And he's like, well, maybe I'm the only one asking the right questions.
Right.
But Magneto, as he says, it's expensive to found a new nation. And, he's not wrong, but given the myriad abilities of all the mutants that live on Genosha, you think the cost of maybe like growing an apple would be cheap. I'm sure there's a mutant who's like, yeah, this is my power. I'm Johnny Appleseed. I throw some blood in the ground, tree grows, we got delicious apples. And you sell them
need
for
Forge out there. Forge is like the guy that you want. Like you're building highways and stuff. Oh my God. He's out in the desert. You need this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hopefully he gets there at some point. I mean, we'll see how the future looks for Forge and the rest of Mutantdom. But
yeah,
we get the introduction of one of the best, most beloved X-Men in this as well, very early on, in Nightcrawler. And he's introduced in a fun way where it's like, oh, he's the teleporter and he bounces around and he's obviously friends with everybody. And, he's very sociable in that way. But I think one of the things that makes Nightcrawler such an interesting character is that he's a man of faith in a world where this is not really common. And, he is very devout, and he has a whole sort of section of the new X-Men comic run that is about him founding a mutant religion and him grappling with, existing theology and his own beliefs in God and his own experience with humanity and mutants and like what good and evil really means and what it means to forge a new religion based on the principles that Charles set forth for Krakoa. And it's a very interesting, philosophical story for Nightcrawler. And he's like a very introspective, thoughtful person. And that's, I think, why he gets along with everybody, because he actually really cares a lot about all of the other X-Men, which you don't see that from a lot of them, to be honest. I mean, I get the idea that they're a team. I get the idea that they're all friends and like borderline family, but I think Kurt embodies that in a way that a lot of the rest of them don't, because of his mutation, making him blue, giving him a tail, giving him like two gigantic toes rather than, normal appendages. So he feels the bond with the family much more than a lot of the other characters do. And like, this is a character that I think will be a huge part of the show moving forward, because I don't see how you can not have him in it. He's just like so much fun that, number one, like it's great to see him drawn, teleporting, having fun, doing Nightcrawler things. But also, if we're going to stick to these storylines of sort of mutants as their own class of people that need to have their own rules, their own governance, their own laws, etc., then sort of what comes next will be a lot of the things that Nightcrawler brings to the table with theology. And I mean, he just had a run where he was Spider-Man in the comics. Like he he wasn't Peter Parker, but he was a Spider-Man in New York because he was just like, you know what? Mutantdom has really got me down lately, and it's kind of nice to just be your friendly neighborhood Nightcrawler. And so he had like a 5-issue run where it's like him and Peter are buddies, and they're just having a good time, and he's doing Spider-Man stuff in New York, and it's like small potatoes, and he loves it.
Right.
But he's still pulled to go back to the X-Men, and like he just needed a vacation, and his vacation was being Spider-Man. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it is really cool. And then he's like, all right, well, now it's time to go back to work and really like get behind my people again. So there's not a ton of characters that sort of frame all mutants, or at least even the X-Men, as like my people. Like Magneto is obviously one of them. Charles is one of them. Cyclops is like yes here sometimes. When it suits him, like yes, but not always. So not every character sort of speaks in that language of this united front. And it's important to see somebody a little bit further down the line who's not an original X-Men, who wasn't like, hey, Charles was my direct teacher, he recruited me, kind of thing. And so sort of like the coaching tree of like it's Charles, and then underneath that you have Scott and Jean and the original Beast and Angel, and then under that you have some of the other recruits. And like the further you get away from Charles, the further the ideology gets watered down, where a lot of these individuals are bringing their own personality into it. And so it's nice to see that Kurt, like kind of a little bit further down the line, buys into like Charles's vision pretty adamantly. Not that a lot of that is communicated directly to us in that.
It's a great introduction to him. He's, I don't want to say a breath of fresh air, but when we get to Genosha, we see a lot of mutants like playing,
Yeah.
you know, but because of the nature of the visit and then what happens, like it's not like the happiest place or most interesting, you know, friendly place.
Not by the end of the episode.
Yeah, having Kurt there, it's great. It's great. I love him. I love seeing him. I have always said if I could have any superpowers, it would be the superpowers of Nightcrawler. Hands down, I would be Nightcrawler.
Just because of the teleportation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, but are you aware that when he teleports, he actually goes into like a hell-like dimension in order to get from point A to point B? He's traversing another universe that is hell. I mean, okay.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, shit, with the cost of gas these days, what's a little time in hell?
Why not? I'm traversing hell every day.
Have you been on the 405? I'd much rather teleport.
So there's this thing that's happening back at the mansion where the mutants are being interviewed by Trish Tilby, and we're doing a few different things and it's fine. And then she gets into talking with Scott, and that's Scott just like, he's doing okay. And then they ask about Nathan and he like loses it.
Yeah.
She's like, hey, what's it like being a parent? Like it's a softball question. And he's like, you people should be glad that we're nothing like you. Yeah, we should let you all die. And he just totally like screws the pooch a little bit and walks off set. Great audio design there. It actually sounds like his character is walking off with a microphone. And it leads to this kind of entanglement thing with Madeline Pryor and Jean. We are also playing up so hard this Magneto and Rogue and Gambit thing prior to, hey, do you want to be the queen? You know, I think it was in the previous episode where Magneto was like, oh, 3 spoons of sugar, you know, for your coffee. And it's like, all right, what? This is 1997. This man lived through World War II. Rogue, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Come on, man. Like, you know, gee willikers. But this is also when we learned that Magneto's magnetic whatever makes it so that they can touch each other. And that's huge. Like, you know, I'm not saying like, oh, Rogue, you shouldn't be with this old guy. But for someone who is like starved for physical contact, I see why, especially as she's describing kind of coming under his tutelage, that was great and complicated and icky feeling, because it's presented as like, I was a bad guy and, my mom introduced me to this guy and wow, he was so smart and cool and he was so interested in me. And then it became like a physical thing. And it's like, that's like a tale as old as time with like cult leaders and, men of charisma who kind of shepherd in people who are feeling lost. And then you get into this physical relationship with them and everything gets kind of complicated. And she's like so ashamed. And Charles was like, we're just never going to tell anybody. And so I liked all that, but there's a lot happening. Like you said, there's a lot of build up to the kind of big explosion that happens. And the stuff with Scott and Jean and Madeline, I was like, my God, this is a children's show, is it not?
Yeah, it was a children's show, I think, at one point, but
holy moly.
Yeah, so let me see how I can unpack all of that. So before we get to that interview with Scott, we see that Jean is sort of back to being Jean. She's just, going about her telekinetic ways. She's in the middle of the river and just using her powers to spread the river apart while she creates little water bubbles with all her memories in it. And, Logan creeps up on her. And so given the context of Logan sort of pining after Jean for all of these years to the point where he's at her bedside when she's in a coma and it's Jean, remember what I think of you and come back to me. And like, he's the one who's really invested in her in that way. And then he walks up on Jean, who is she's deciphering her memories of like, well, I have all these great memories of Scott. And she's telling him this story of I gave up being the Phoenix and all this eternal power because of Scott's eyes. And like Logan's like, great, just I get to hear this again. And in that moment, she also kisses Logan because she knows that her relationship with Scott is sort of on the rocks because of what's happened with Madeline. And
well, I think she kisses him first before she finds out about Scott and Madeline.
Well, before she violates Scott and Madeline's private space. Yeah. Tons of violation
I see
going
what
on
you
again.
mean. I see what. We're in the process of parsing out that whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we even get there, she already knows that Scott and Madeline have a son together, that like their relationship is in jeopardy, that she can't quite trust that Scott loves her and vice versa. And so she's definitely got attraction to Logan, and that has been sort of on the back burner for a while, but she kisses Logan and not on the cheek or on the forehead. She smooches him romantically on the mouth. And in that moment, we learn a lot about who Logan is as a character, because this is this thing that he has wanted forever. In his 100-something years of being alive, he's never wanted anything more than he's wanted Jean Grey. And she kisses him and sort of opens that door. And he, for some reason, decides that Scott is my friend, despite the fact that I fucking hate him. And you're Jean Grey, he's Scott Summers. That's the way that it is. And this thing that just happened with us is not the way that it is supposed to be. And you'll go back to him and you'll figure it out. And then that leads us to sort of what happens later with Jean being like, oh, you're right, I need to patch things up with Scott. Let me just drop in on our mind walkie-talkie that we've been using for our whole lives. And then it's like, what the fuck is Madeline doing here? You know, but before we get to that, we get a very emotionally charged Scott during that interview where they are giving him softball questions. It is like a puff piece on like, hey, the X-Men are regular people. We're just trying to communicate that. But
can I just say before we move on from Wolverine and a worse written show would not cut it off there. This would continue to be one more little thread of drama. But I think, not that I necessarily agree with Logan just being like, hey, these are the rules. I know how it is. You know, we're not doing this. Not that I disagree with him either. Like, but I was just like, oh, that's such good writing to have this happen. And then it just is over. Like, they're not going to continue bleeding that for drama's sake. I was like, wow, that's two real people. That's two real adults making a decision that's perhaps contrary to what their hearts want, but would probably be realistic. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
Yeah, and Gene says to him like, "Oh, I forget like how many sunrises, your eyes have seen."
Mm-hmm.
And cuz Wolverine's probably a few hundred years old. If he's over 100 for sure. But then like how old exactly is a little bit up in the air depending on like
Sure.
which writer is working with him. But you get this guy in Wolverine whose stoicism and his dedication and his belief in the X-Men and the team, despite being a great sort of individual character who goes out on all his own adventures and has like his own fans aside from being part of the team, he believes in Charles and he knows Charles helped him and he knows that this is his family. So to get a character like that in this situation to then just shut down this thing from Jean being like, she's young. And if you let your memories get the better of you and you just focus on the past, it'll drown you. And I know that firsthand because I've been alive for so damn long. But I think, the Scott and Logan rivalry really stems from a place not of competition for Jean, but because they are so similar. They have slightly different ideologies on like what leadership means, what friendship means. But at the end of the day, like these two guys are both very stoic in the face of danger. They're both very good leaders. They both care about the people around them. They probably have so much in common that they hate to look at the other guy and realize that Jean is rightfully attracted to that person. Because it'd be easy to be like, I don't get it. Or like she, it would be easy to frame her in the context of she's doing this to get back at me, or she's doing this out of spite or whatever other reason. She wasn't in her right mind. She was drunk, blah, blah, blah. All these other reasons that like Jean could be into the other person. What it comes down to is like, you guys are very similar. And she just met Scott first. And that's what it is. But you guys have a lot of very similar character traits. So I love that sort of precedes this moment of Scott's already boiling tension before he sits down in this chair. And like the one thing that the X-Men seem to really need is like a mutant PR person. Someone whose power is like, yeah, I really understand media and manipulation, and my job is to come in here and make the X-Men look good. Because without Charles there isn't really any oversight onto how these interviews are going to go. And you put Scott in this chair and, like you said, for a while, it's softball questions. It seems like everything is okay. And he says this to the interviewer. He says, I have to stomach your questions and prove that I'm a person.
Yeah.
And it's a great line because again, we're talking about the stoicism of these characters, and Scott is already dealing with so much. He's like, are you fucking kidding me right now? My son is in the future. My wife is a clone, and now I have to sit down with some reporter from the local news while she asks me bullshit questions just to prove that I'm just like you. And so sort of going back to what I was talking about with Nightcrawler of the tree of learning from Charles, right? Scott is one of his most devout students, but what we see over the course of Scott's life is that he begins to skew towards Magneto. And I think this is a good sort of seedling for that future if they're going to take it there, because Scott is pissed. And I think rightfully so. He doesn't have to be like, he doesn't imply quite that they would kill humanity, but basically, if we didn't fight and sacrifice and die for you, you would all be dead. And you guys do not care. You don't thank us whatsoever. So, I'm pissed and I'm out of here. And I feel him in that moment. I'm like, he's got a lot on his plate. Somebody should have known better than to stick a microphone in his face to begin with. But, you're the leader of the X-Men. You kind of got to do the press tour.
Yeah. And I think it also helps. So we're always trying to buffer Scott from being a bad guy.
Yeah.
We're always trying to buffer him to be seen in a way that is understandable. And so when we see him essentially cheating on Jean, it's at least emotional cheating.
Yeah,
on
for
Jean.
Sure.
That would be like a deal breaker for us, mid-season. Be like, all right, Scott sucks here, But because we see all the stress that he's under when he's leaning on Madeline, it's like, okay, yeah, he does kind of have a lot going on. And this is the person that he has been talking to and confided in for the last, we don't know how long. And it's hard for him to break that off. And again, I don't agree with it, but like you said, Jean is she's in the river with her thought bubbles and kissing Logan, and they're both working through things at the same time. And again, that's reality. That's realistic. Yes, sometimes when you're in a relationship, one of the people in that relationship blindsides the other and says, oh, I've been going through all these things, but oftentimes you have two people going through things at the same exact time. And again, I was like, this is for kids. Like, this is not for kids.
Yeah, it's very smart. It's very adult. And it's not just that he's going through things. Like when you step back and give it the context that Jean and Scott have this psychic rapport, as she calls it, right? Like they have a psychic link that, basically they don't need to be near each other. They can just pick up their mind phone and call each other. And again, this is written in the 90s. Cell phones aren't popular, so that's not like what they're getting at, but there is a shorthand sort of communication system for them. And so it's not just that Scott is like confiding in Madeline, it's that he's had this relationship with what he perceived was Jean and what probably was Jean for a long time, that they've had this sort of closed loop where they can communicate their feelings. And it's what's made them so strong through so much is that their communication is really good. And so what happens when the person that you're communicating with isn't the person that you thought it was? Now, like your communication, like it immediately throws all that into turmoil because of Madeline. And like from Scott's perspective, up until he found out that Madeline was a clone, he was just communicating with Jean and he felt that like everything is, normal. And then, yes, it is another violation for him to go behind Jean's back. And it's one thing to be like, okay, I'm just talking to Madeline. I was checking on her after she moved to the island and stuff. But it's like, I saw you kissing her in your mind, bro. This isn't just like, hey, you guys are talking about Nathan and the fact that, we got a co-parent from across the globe kind of thing. It's like, you guys aren't talking logistics here. Scott is cheating, and that's what it is. I understand that. I don't necessarily justify it, but I understand where Scott's at. Where you start to maybe lose his heroism is when he gaslights Jean after that, being like, well, do you love me? I don't even know. I know Madeline loves me. Right. And it's like, bro, don't weaponize your affair with the clone.
Right. Jean says like, they cut out a part of me and you fall in love with it. And I'm like, well, I mean, he does love you. So, know,
I know, because he says like, I love both of you.
Yeah, it might be nice to know that. Yeah, even an imitation of you, he's into it. But she has so much more to back up her position. She's like, I was literally the Phoenix, and I came back for you. Galaxies were beckoning me.
Yeah, you loser.
So at that point, you're just like, I'm wrong. What I did was wrong. You are right. I am sorry, but anyway.
Just say like, yeah, be honest. I'm struggling with this. I don't know how to feel. I'm confused. Charles, who I would confide in and help me to guide me through this kind of stuff, is not here. And I'm not going to talk to Magneto about this.
It's complicated.
You want me to talk to Logan about this? Like Scott has no friends,
Yeah. Other than they make it good. And again, in 30 to 40 minutes, they're unpacking so much stuff. Yeah. So much stuff.
And one of my favorite moments about that scene is that they're like fighting in the X-Mansion while the interviews are going on. And they're like coming down the stairs and like Jean's lecturing him about this. And you got Beast in the living room who just goes, oh boy. Like he knew it was coming. And he's just like, uh-oh, this is blowing up in front of the media. Like this isn't good. So I love that Beast is like somehow the comic relief here, even though he's like Beast in the comics where he's at right now is not this lovey dovey furball character. Like he's an asshole. So what we see here with Scott too is the foundation of what makes him one of the X-Men's best villains in the future. And his complicated like personality and his relationship and history with Charles, with Eric, with Jean, all that stuff leads him to a certain place. And I think one of the things that has made Cyclops my favorite character over the years isn't just that like he is complicated, that he's the leader, that like, yeah, he shoots like laser beams out of his eyes. That's cool. But if you were like to step back and just like go to base character design, a guy whose only power is just like a giant powerful laser beam is typically going to be a villain. And so to take a guy that would have the power set of a villain and not just make him a hero, but make him the leader of the heroes is an interesting way to, you know, contextualize his character, because he's burdened by his power in a way that a lot of people would break and give in to like what it means to be a villain versus like practicing restraint and sort of buying into Charles' methodology there. So we get so much of that. Like we're already like, we're not even talking about Magneto and Gambit and Rogue's little love triangle going on, because we're dealing with this love triangle. But we got that going on in the background too, where Gambit is obviously super lovelorn, super into Rogue. They definitely love each other. And if we give Rogue the grace of some other media, like Anna Paquin's Rogue, right, where we see her basically make her boyfriend go into a coma when she kisses him when they're kids, right? She lives in this perpetual fear of hurting somebody that she loves. And that is the rub when it comes to her and Gambit. Gambit's like, I'm willing to take that chance. He's like, if I die, I die. It's okay. And she's like, I love you too much to take that chance. But she is still a human being that needs affection. And so the whole Magneto backstory and how he's able to touch her, I think what we've been given from Rogue just in this show doesn't maybe quite explain why Magneto is the choice other than the physical contact. Because, you know, I watched all this stuff. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go take a shower, get ready for work. And then I'm thinking to myself when I'm getting ready, like, how fucking old is Magneto in this show? Like, this is 1997. He was 10, if I'm being nice. He was 10 during the Holocaust. So let's say the back end, right? 1945. So
45, 35. So 60. I mean, yeah.
He's in his 60s. So I'm like, okay, well, how old are the X-Men then? Because if like Rogue is 40, it's like, okay, that's not that crazy to think. But I don't view these X-Men as 40-year-olds. But now that I'm almost 40, I'm like, maybe.
Yeah, I would say, you know, Jubilee is 18. So you can put Rogue between like 25 and 30, I feel like.
It seems sensible.
Yeah, I mean, 30 to 62 years old isn't the craziest thing in the world. And they were romantic prior, but then again, that also puts Rogue younger, so that's also worse.
Yeah. Well, this is Robert De Niro's Magneto.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, we get the whole love triangle between them, and I love that like Magneto is fully aware of it and just doesn't ever speak to Gambit with any kind of like respect or humanity, for lack of a better word. But he does tell Rogue, like he's aware of Gambit's plight, which sucks, because he's like, loving you makes broken men whole. And he's like, me and Gambit share that, but we don't share that from a place of peers. I'm the leader. He's just some nobody who I could kill if I wanted to, kind of thing. And because I'm Magneto, I get Rogue and he gets the shaft.
Yep.
And that's kind of crazy because, you know, I think Gambit has to hear the details of Rogue and Magneto at one point, and it's just like, this poor guy. I mean, he loves her so much, and all he wants to do is touch her at the risk of his own death. And instead, she's like, no, this 60-year-old is really, he's the one that's going to get my rocks off right now. And that's really sad for Gambit. And so like we're already like at the point where this episode is so emotionally charged, like halfway through, with all this interpersonal drama, that like when the gears shift and now you're like in the devastation of it, like all that emotional trauma is now like spilling in every direction. So I think it's an interesting microcosm of like what the episode ends up becoming, to just see that like even in the small relationships between the characters that we know and love, they're in like disaster crisis mode with their emotions already.
It's absolutely insane that Magneto goes before this council. They want him to lead Genosha. Okay, fine. Everything is coming up Magneto. Okay. And he's like, yeah, I'll do it on one condition. And then we just cut. I need to see Emma Frost's reaction to Magneto being like, I'll do it if you make Rogue my queen. Like, I wrote in my notes, I was like, can the council do that?
Yeah, like we're actually starting a monarchy? Like, come on. Magneto, like, you've been around long enough to know that this kind of stuff is outdated. You're very much forward thinking about mutant kind. You want a queen making you the king. But to your point about Emma, she's a fantastic character. She's one of the most fabulous characters in the comics right now. Like, they've really written her personality to the point where it's like she's at the forefront of the storytelling, and it's great. And one of my favorite scenes in this episode is sort of in the middle of Madeline and Scott all having like their like mind orgy.
Yeah.
You see Madeline at the table, like, ugh. She like has that moment of something like breaking. And so number one, she's sitting on the council while like canoodling with Scott in the mind bedroom. And then Emma, who is also a psychic, is just like, I know what was going on there, because she like she has like a little quip of like she was also picking up on, she was just observing. Yeah, she's like, yeah, you guys didn't know I was there, but I was being a voyeur in your sex.
Yeah, Madeline's like, oh, I was kind of wandering off, and Emma was like, yeah, sure.
And Emma ends up with Scott. Probably a few years down the line in this story as well, because Scott has now burned his bridges with Jean and Madeline. And so naturally next up is Emma in that equation, because he's like, I can't not be with a psychic. I need somebody inside my brain.
Well, yeah, I mean, certain people have types, you know.
Scott's got a type, all right.
And so when you're a mutant, you might be like, I have to be with someone who can fly. I'm sorry. You know, I can't be with a guy who can't fly.
Scott's like, look, I have major emotional problems, and I need, like, he basically wants to be with a psychologist, but he's like, no, you need to get in there with your scissors and make sure everything is nice and neat, trim away all the fat inside my emotional brain holes there. So yeah, Scott, it's funny to see that Scott's type has like maintained that over the year.
So we get a cool Rogue and Magneto dance, which I kind of liked just for its beauty and how it's animated.
Yeah.
Story wise, it's not making a whole ton of sense.
It's very sensual, though. Lots of touching.
It looks great. And, you know, Rogue kind of like lets him down, and then all hell breaks loose. And this Sentinel looks incredible. It looks like something out of an anime.
Oh, yeah.
In its kind of like grotesque nature, the style in which it's drawn, the way that it moves, I was like, man, I feel like I'm back watching like Big O or something.
Yeah,
like,
that's a good point.
I love this Sentinel, and it seemingly just comes out of nowhere, and it's almost like a Godzilla type. You know, a lot of the animation from the 90s version, it's just not here, and it makes this Sentinel appearing, as we've talked about last episode. The Sentinels are supposed to be like the scariest thing in the world, but we're constantly just dispatching them really quickly. And so now it's like, oh, this is something different. This is something like actually scary and like kind of disturbing. And it just wrecks them.
Yeah, and I think Gambit indeed does call it like some Godzilla kind of Sentinel.
Yeah.
And I know that there was a comic of the Tri-Sentinel, and this looks like it has like a 3-headed structure to the top of it. And there's like this whole story in the comics of Spider-Man fighting the Tri-Sentinel, but needing the Captain Universe power in order to combat it. So I'm curious if they took sort of that idea and adapted it for this, because it kind of looks like an insect. Like, it has the shell of maybe like a scarab, and it's got the sort of like the front hands of maybe a praying mantis. It definitely has a menacing look to it, and sort of like a kaiju in that way, where kaijus are, you know, big overblown versions of existing creatures in that way. So you do get this thing that is finally not just menacing in its scope, right? Like, it's massive. It's obviously dealing tons of damage, But I think what's implied because of our relationship to Genosha by the time we get to that episode is just the absolute cost of life that is going down in the background before we even see sort of the first altercation between the mutants we know and this giant being. And by the time that we see it, by the time that the characters that we are associating with see it, we're going from this very sensual, intimate dance between Magneto and Rogue. We're sort of left with her telling him, like, Remy was right. Like, you're going to break my heart. And there are some things that are like deeper than skin. And it's basically, okay, he was right. I'm ready to go and confess to him that I was right. And I'm not going to take the Magneto queen job. And at that moment, we get Madeline outside having her mental connection with Cable, who I think she just finds out is Nathan in that moment, because she's like recognizes him as Cable. And then she just like sees his eyes and like, wait a second, you're my son. And he's like, bye, mom. And then devastation in the distance.
Yes, very interesting that he actually calls her mom. You know, I mean, but yeah.
So yeah, we're sort of like stripped from this gala, this big celebratory event, and then we're seeing, oh my God, there's like this bomb that's going off in the distance, and you already see like pillars of smoke. There's fire already. The shit has already hit the fan at that point. So the cost of life is already like way out of control before we even get to any of our sort of character interactions with the gigantic sentinel bug. And did you catch when the fireworks were going off over Genosha for the party? Did you see the Watcher?
No, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, you can see his sort of like silhouette in the night sky there. And I was
Is
like,
it
did
to
I
the
just
left?
see that? Yeah.
Okay, so I did see something, and I was like, it looks like something's there.
Yeah, I see his bald head peeking out.
Yeah.
So I rewound it, and there he is.
It's also interesting that even within Genosha, and it's this world of all mutants, you still have a different group of people, which are the Morlocks, who are the mutants who they cannot pass as humans, like a lot of the mutants can. And so it's an interesting little touch. You know, we see a lot of these characters as we're doing our overview of Genosha. So it's not like they're relegated to the sewers.
Correct.
But they're still at least like a tribe unto themselves, in that they're like sequestered in this different area when everything goes down. So yeah, even in a perfect society, there are still going to be little subgroups.
Yeah, the Morlock sewers are just nicer on Genosha.
Absolutely.
As they should be, at least. So yeah, there's the giant explosion that interrupts the gala, and for some reason it's all green. I don't know exactly why, other than it's a nice bright color, but the explosion definitely kills Madeline. And at first I wasn't 100% sure about that, but she does eventually get lined up next to Sebastian Shaw, whose power is absorbing energy. So I don't think Shaw would die from that either. But they're lining up bodies and some familiar faces to let us know that, hey, important characters have died here. Kurt is able to teleport a couple people out of the way at the last second in order to make sure that they're safe, but it costs him a lot of energy to do that because he's probably been doing that all over Genosha already, trying to get people to safety, because that's the kind of person that Kurt is. And then we get basically straight away into this fight against the Sentinel. And Magneto gives them some instructions of, hey, Rogue is going to like clear the path. Gambit is going to go rescue the Morlocks. And that's the plan of action here. And so we get this whole like sweeping action sequence through the city, seeing like Rogue and Gambit working together. And it's like, oh, you know, she just rejected Magneto. She decided that Gambit's going to be the one. And now they're in tag team mode. And it's not necessarily romantic, but it is sort of pointing us in the direction of like they're going to have their happily ever after, so to speak. And that doesn't work out, but we get some great moments between the two of them, including Gambit decapitating a sentinel with his cards. Like I never know how powerful he is. It's like he throws an ace of spades at a sentinel's head and the head comes right off.
Right. Yeah. And, going back to the first episode that we did on this, when he's just throwing a charged up beignet at Scott's head as a joke. And it's a good. There's a picture here of Gambit wanting and willing to be intimate with Rogue, close to her, but her powers would kill him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we compare that with this Sentinel thing that skewers him, and in bringing him in, physically, that's what kind of destroys the Sentinel creature, because now that they're connected, he can kind of charge the whole entire thing, which is a cool use of his powers, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like, who can take down this thing? Even Magneto is like struggling against this, which I'm like, there isn't metal anywhere.
It looks like that thing is entirely made of metal. But
okay, they thought of everything, but so yeah, it's an interesting thing that like the intimacy with death, the flirting with death.
Yeah,
Gambit as the roguish guy who he doesn't care about. He says the odds are always in his favor, right? So it's just interesting how like in life, in death, this intimate walk with death is just kind of represented for him throughout this episode. So I thought that was kind of a cool parallel.
It is. And you think of like the lack of intimacy physically that Rogue and Gambit have. The moment where they fight together is like as close as they can get to that physical intimacy, because they both get to like be at the full height of their mutant abilities in that moment. And I want to ask you sort of too, like earlier as Kurt is sort of watching Gambit and Rogue, he's like, any idiot can see that when you two look at each other, like your souls are connected. And Gambit says something to him like, no, like I can't love her because I got too much sinning to do. And Kurt tells him like love is sin, basically, and like they're interconnected. And so to like put them in this place where they get into the confrontation that ultimately cost Gambit his life, it's not that he's sinning, but he is sort of like acting like he's engaging in violence, but it is like sort of unnecessary violence at that point. But it isn't this moment of like, hey, I want to spend maybe my last moments taking that risk with Rogue. I want her to touch me and see what happens because, hey, if we, I might die here. And instead, it's sort of like this hero's sacrifice of he charges up the motorcycle, knocks her out of the way, and he's the one who's like super confident that he's going to take this thing down. The cards are always in my favor kind of thing. Or he's like, no, I hold all the cards. So it's a lot of gambling puns. And like this robot is like, well, shit, I don't know gambling. So he's obviously going to kick my ass. And we sort of see him like charging up with the staff and we're not sure what's going to happen. It doesn't seem like it's going to work out too well for him. And he gets impaled. And in that moment, we're sort of stuck having to be sad for him in that, wow, Gambit just like a main X-Men character on the show just got impaled by this robot. It's one thing to see Madeline die, who, while she was briefly a main character, is also a clone. It's another thing to see Sebastian Shaw lined up next to her because while a villain, he is also not necessarily like a primary character on the show that we're doing so far. And Gambit like raises the stakes, and I wasn't sure that they were going to take that chance with him charging the Sentinel, but like when it touched him, I was like, can he charge it from like an open wound? And then it starts happening, and I'm like, yeah. And still, like, I still had goosebumps. I still was emotional like during this episode when it was over, because this notion of Gambit having to sort of like die the tragic hero in order to get Rogue's attention is fucking really sad. Like you said, everything's just coming up Magneto. He just sort of like, Charles gave me his school. I'm the leader of Genosha. Rogue is into me. I don't have to work really hard for anything right now. And then poor Gambit is sort of just like in the wings. And then his ultimate sacrifice, his proof of love for Rogue, is stopping her from making that sacrifice and making it himself. And it's a very valiant moment. And that sort of, he just iterates, the name's Gambit, Mon Ami, remember it. And that's an impactful moment. And it still plays really, really well.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great death. It's very sad. It's very upsetting. Gambit was one of the cool 90s dudes, and unfortunately, with the recent strain of X-Men visually, how do I want to say this? Movies and cartoons and stuff, Gambit has been screwed over time and time again. And so it was cool that he gets this kind of big, and this is, like I said, this is like the halfway point for the season and for the story that they're telling so far. It's cool.
It is very much so. And then you're just sort of left in the vacuum of that tragedy, not just for him, because it's like, we lose him as a character, but then when you sort of step back and look at the entirety of the mutant world that we've sort of become connected to, they've lost a lot of people overall, and they've worked so hard to fight, and Magneto has tried so hard to not immediately villainize all humans and give them the benefit of the doubt in Charles's name, only to be proven right the whole time and to have to take it on the chin in like the worst way possible. Because it's not just Gambit. Like Gambit is the one that sort of gets that over the finish line for us, but it's Gambit and probably thousands of other mutants that were on that island, hundreds for sure. So the cost of that night and that moment is so heavy moving forward that it sort of it gives Magneto all the motivation that he would need at that moment. But we see in this episode, Magneto basically protects Rogue and Gambit from dying and sacrifices himself in that moment too. So we're left at the end of this episode thinking like, wow, Magneto's gone, Gambit's gone, Shaw's gone, Madeline's gone. Like big heavy hitters in the X-Men universe are just wiped out in this moment in Genosha. And it's a lot to deal with.
Well, you gotta clear the playing field for what comes next in episode 6.
You have to.
Opener.
Yeah.
Make room.
Because we're not in Genosha anymore.
Thank you for checking out the show and becoming an X-Friend. Hopefully you'll join us on our journey through X-Men 97 and beyond. X-Friends is a Movie Friends and Bad Movies We Love co-production and part of the Scheist Podcast Network, hosted by Seth Vargas and Nick Scheist. You can find our contact info and socials in the show notes, and you can email the show directly at xfriends@thescheist.com. That's the letter X, friends@thescheist.com. So until next time, don't be what they made you.